What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we're getting into running back rankings, specifically our top 12 rushers for this 2020 fantasy football season, where they project, how they're tiered, etc. Now, this will be a little bit more PPR themed, so keep that in mind. But before we get into it, a quick reminder, check out the all new and updated website at alldaypigskin.com. Get yourself a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide so that you can go ahead and get more in-depth rankings like these, get a more extensive list on our top running backs, and also see our rankings as far as standard formats are concerned. All the details in the description, but a great value. Everything you could possibly want. Check that out now. And as always, if you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. But for now, let's get right into it. Coming in at number one, we have got Christian McCaffrey, and maybe to nobody's surprise, but when you're looking at a full point PPR format, you have to start with McCaffrey. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of chatter for a guy like a Saquon Barkley, and we get it. I mean, if this was a standard format type of list, then Barkley would definitely have something to say about it, and it's not like he's that far behind. If it's 1A, then it's 1B. But it's really the reception number that puts McCaffrey ahead of his competition, specifically in the tier 1 running back category, because last season alone, McCaffrey had 116 receptions, folks. The only player in the entire NFL that had more catches was Michael Thomas, the wide receiver that set the record for that category in 2019. So keep that in mind. In fact, McCaffrey, since he's entered the NFL, has been top 5 in terms of receptions during that span. So impressive considering that he is a running back that puts up big rushing yards as well. Now, I know that there's going to be some skeptics that say, well, there's going to be a regression in terms of total production. And yes, we here at ADP tend to agree with that because, after all, this Carolina team as a whole probably will be one of the worst in the NFL. They have got a new head coach, pretty much an entirely new defense. And then on offense, they now have Teddy Bridgewater under center. And he's not really known as a guy that airs it out. He's more so of a game manager. You've got a shaky offensive line. So there's a lot of question marks right there. And it begs the question, can Christian McCaffrey duplicate his crazy numbers? I mean, last season, he joined the illustrious 1,000 club as he had pretty close to 1,400 yards rushing and over 1,000 yards receiving. Just as impressive was his league-leading total touchdown number with 19 overall touchdowns. But again, with this offense having serious question marks and the team as a whole, we do expect regression in that total touchdown number. I mean, it's a category that has huge variability from year to year. And in general, it's probably pretty safe to assume that you're going to see a dip in total rush yards, anywhere from 200 to 250 yards less. Receiving yards, probably a dip in that category as well. We will really need to see the type of play that Teddy Bridgewater exhibits. Reception count, probably going to be a little bit smaller as well. But at the end of the day, we just have Christian McCaffrey still accounting for close to 100 receptions on the season, which is significantly more than we have any of the other tier 1 running backs. And that is the primary reason why we still have Christian McCaffrey coming in at the number 1 spot for 2020 running backs. Next up at number 2, we have got the aforementioned Saquon Barkley. And for all of you Barkley lovers out there, don't worry, we're pretty high on Barkley ourselves. He might not be our 1A, but he's right there at 1B. And honestly, the separation isn't all that much. Because even though Barkley disappointed in 2019 due to an ankle injury that forced him to miss several games, and the bigger issue was that it lingered thereon after, he still finished with 1,003 rushing yards, 52 receptions, for a total of 438 yards receiving, which shows you that ideally the Giants want their offense to go through Saquon Barkley. And it makes his stat line that much more impressive when you consider all the upheaval the offense had between Eli Manning and Daniel Jones. But now with Daniel Jones having the entire team behind him and being the guy for the Giants, you expect a little bit more stability. And naturally, the Giants are going to want to alleviate some pressure from the young Daniel Jones by giving the ball to Saquon Barkley. And that's a big reason why we love ourselves some Barkley, because pure rushing potential on a game-to-game basis, there might not be a better candidate than Saquon Barkley in the entire NFL. He will be one of the favorites to win the rushing title. You also expect positive regression in terms of total touchdowns. He only had 6 rushing touchdowns and 2 receiving touchdowns. You expect to see double-digit rushing touchdowns from a guy like Saquon Barkley. On top of all of this, he is still a somewhat underrated pass catcher. But the real problem here, if you want to compare him to Christian McCaffrey, which is the main thing that a lot of people are doing nowadays when deciding who to have at that number 1 spot and who to take first overall, is that unlike Christian McCaffrey, who's the primary weapon in every category for his offense, the Giants have some more pieces. They've got a Sterling Shepard. They've got a Golden Tate. They've also got an Evan Ingram. And all those guys will go ahead and take away some pass catching opportunities for Saquon Barkley. So purely from that standpoint, we believe that Barkley might finish a little bit under Christian McCaffrey in terms of total receiving yards, total receptions, which will ultimately put him at that number 2 spot. But he will more than make up for that, getting him pretty close to McCaffrey at the end of the day because of what he can do with his feet. Probably between 200, 300 more yards is fair to say than Christian McCaffrey. And we like that touchdown number to increase for Barkley. All in all, he will be a surefire tier 1 running back similar to Christian McCaffrey. Next up at number 3, we have got Ezekiel Elliott. And even though Zeke didn't have all that many blow-up monster memorable games in 2019, he still finished the year as the number 3 overall PPR scoring running back. And honestly, we believe he absolutely has that type of performance in him yet again for 2020. The only reason that we have Zeke slightly lower than Saquon Barkley is primarily because of his reception total, because Saquon just gets a little bit more usage in that category. And it's nothing to shame Zeke on because he still had over 50 receptions last season, 54 to be exact. But when fully healthy, Saquon Barkley will probably be closer to that 70 number. But on the flip side, as far as pure rushing ability, Ezekiel Elliott will be in that conversation, probably neck and neck with Saquon Barkley all season long, and maybe a Derrick Henry for league rushing leaders. Now, what sets Ezekiel Elliott apart from these other running backs that we've mentioned is honestly the offensive line, because the Dallas Cowboys by far compared to these other teams have the best offensive line that we've mentioned. Now, sure, let's go ahead and acknowledge the fact that Travis Frederick, the center for the Dallas Cowboys, did retire. That is going to be a big blow. But we have specifically seen Zeke excel when Frederick has been absent for a prolonged period of time before, so we're not all that worried in that respect. And we all know that Zeke, well, he's a huge part for this offense. Dak Prescott did take a big step forward last season, but Ezekiel Elliott continued to remain involved. And the Dallas Cowboys continue to want to run the football because that's what sets up the success for Dak Prescott. So when it's all said and done, we absolutely believe that Ezekiel Elliott should be a tier 1 running back still, and maybe somewhat nice compared to these other teams. We know that if an injury occurs to a Dak Prescott, the Dallas Cowboys have got a serviceable quarterback replacement in Andy Dalton. So the possibility of a decline in offensive play, not as big of a concern for the Dallas Cowboys if something happens to their starting quarterback, which you always have to worry about. Ezekiel Elliott, extremely durable as well, which should guarantee him, in all likelihood, a top 3 finish in 2020. Coming in at number 4, we have got Dalvin Cook, and this will probably be the most controversial entry at this point in time, but Dalvin Cook, compared to other tier 1 running backs, and yes, we have Dalvin Cook as an expected tier 1 running back for 2020, is the riskiest candidate so far, because not only has he suffered more injuries and had a longer injury history than Zeke, Barkley, or Christian McCaffrey, But now all of a sudden he finds himself in contract disputes with the Minnesota Vikings. And unfortunately, this is becoming the norm for top end running backs that are getting close to the end of their contract and they want to get paid. But at this point in time, we are projecting that that situation will get resolved between Dalvin Cook and the Minnesota Vikings. But if you want to go ahead and put an asterisk next to this ranking and to Dalvin Cook's name, we absolutely understand it, because not only do you have contract situation to potentially keep an eye out for, but you also have to keep in mind the injury situation Dalvin Cook has, even though last season he still played 14 games and had that breakout year that everyone thought that might never come. But for what it's worth, we kept telling you guys last season, Dalvin Cook is someone you want to own, and 2020 is no exception, because the Vikings are a run-first team. That was the case in 2019. That'll be the case again in 2020. They have upgraded their offensive line. Kirk Cousins is a good game-managing quarterback, but he is made better when Dalvin Cook is there and running the football when the offense goes through him. No more Stephon Diggs. Dalvin Cook will probably have a bigger role in this offense. And he proved he could do that last season, because even though he only played 14 games, he was still the 5th overall running back in standard formats and number 6 overall in PPR scoring. And if he plays a full 16 games, well, he's probably a spot or two higher. He finished with 1,135 rushing yards, 13 rushing touchdowns, and 53 receptions for 519 receiving yards. So from that category, probably pretty similar to what you might expect to see from an Ezekiel Elliott. The real point to consider here will be, again, injuries and the contract situation. Otherwise, we believe Ezekiel Elliott and Dalvin Cook have very similar type of ceilings. Dalvin Cook even probably a little bit of a better pass catcher and runner after the catch. So for that reason, we still have him as a tier 1 running back. He concludes that category of guys because unlike the next tier, he still can go ahead and get you 1,300 rushing yards on the season and over 500 receiving yards as well. So for that reason, he comes in at the number 4 spot. Next up at number 5, we have got Alvin Kamara, and this is where we officially transition to our tier 2 group of running backs. These are still high-end RB1s, but just not quite as complete as the tier 1 runners. And for Alvin Kamara, it comes in the form of rushing total yards, because unlike a Dalvin Cook, a Zeke, a Barkley, or a Christian McCaffrey, he probably won't have as many rushing yards as those guys. But to some extent, he will make up for it in the receiving category, specifically receptions and receiving yards in PPR formats again. Because last season, even though he did disappoint in terms of where he was drafted and what his projections were, he still managed, while being hurt for the majority of the season and missing several games, to finish as a top 10 PPR running back. Now, something that we do have to consider here that we didn't for our other names on this list up until this point is that Alvin Kamara will see a running back behind him in Latavius Murray get some playing time. And it won't only be when the Saints are blowing out a team or if Kamara is injured, because the Saints for some time now have liked to use a system of a veteran running back behind Alvin Kamara to go ahead and keep him fresh, to keep him more efficient. And that's not to say that Alvin Kamara can't be a workhorse running back and be a volume guy, because we saw when Mark Ingram was previously suspended while he was on the team, Kamara was blowing up during that point in time. And that's why we love the ceiling for Alvin Kamara, because if we had to pick another running back that had the potential for a 1,000 season this year, not named Christian McCaffrey, it would be Alvin Kamara. He's got a great offensive line, a great offense, one of the best offenses scoring-wise in the NFL year in and year out, plays in the NFC South. There's going to be a lot of points being put up. He'll still probably be the number 2 guy as far as total receptions on the team behind Michael Thomas. Drew Brees loves him as a quick target to go ahead to. And for that reason, we absolutely believe in Alvin Kamara in 2020. And that's why he's our first tier 2 running back and absolutely has the potential to burst into tier 1 category at some point in the season. At number 6, we've got Austin Ekeler. And Ekeler is a perfect example of a running back that's much better suited in PPR scoring than in standard scoring, as we saw even in 2019. As in his breakout season with Melvin Gordon sitting out, Ekeler was a top 10 standard scoring running back, but in PPR formats, he was a top 5 scoring running back. And now with Melvin Gordon out, yes, he will get a lot more volume consistently. But on the flip side, what makes this whole situation a little bit tough to judge is that arguably the most important offensive piece left for the Chargers in Phillip Rivers. So there will be some regression for this offense as a whole. But at this point in time, we do believe that Austin Ekeler is the most bust-proof, if you will, out of all those offensive weapons. Because whether it's Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert, they should all be targeting Austin Ekeler in that short passing game with those quick throws. And whether it's Rivers or Herbert or Tyrod Taylor, well, Austin Ekeler with no more Melvin Gordon is going to get a lot of those carries. And even though his reception count and receiving yards will likely decrease, his rushing yard and increased rushing opportunities will probably to some extent offset that. Now, sure, we're not as high on him as we would have been last season if Phillip Rivers did return. But again, we do like him in these PPR scoring formats. Note, however, out of all of these tier 2 guys, he probably has the biggest question mark surrounding him, because based on what happens in this quarterback situation for the Chargers, well, these Charger offensive players could either be one of the nicest surprises for fantasy, or they could definitely disappoint. So that's why Ekeler is one of these guys that's definitely carrying more risk than the names that we have mentioned at this point in time. At number 7, we've got Joe Mixon. And 2019 was an absolute roller coaster type of year for Mixon. He started off the season as someone that was arguably droppable until he put together a pretty solid end to the season and proved to be really valuable and reminded people why he was being drafted as a first-round pick. But to some extent, 2019, it's hard to fault Mixon for his performance because the Bengals, even before the year started, lost 2 very important offensive linemen. And then when the season progressed, they ended up benching Andy Dalton, and that really hurt the entire offense. But fast forward to 2020, and with Andy Dalton no longer there, it's now the Joe Burrow show. The number 1 pick in this year's NFL draft should have some more stability and continuity for the entire 2020 season. But let's not forget, Burrow is still a rookie quarterback, so we do expect a fair share of struggles from Burrow. In fact, if Andy Dalton was still in town, we'd definitely be a little bit higher on Joe Mixon. But as far as pure skill set is concerned, with this offensive line returning to be a little bit healthier, we think that Joe Burrow should excel in the rushing category, as last season, even with all those issues, he had close to 1,150 rushing yards. The X factor here will really be the reception category. Last season, 35 receptions for 287 yards. But Mixon absolutely has the potential to break out in that category, similar to a Leonard Fournette or a Todd Gurley or an Ezekiel Elliott from a couple years ago. And that's where his upside truly lies. Now, again, he is in this tier 2 category because we don't really know what to expect from Joe Burrow. Joe Mixon, we know he's an absolute stud. If he gets some more usage as a pass catcher, well, his value could really go ahead and outproduce his current ADP. That's why we really like Mixon for this 2020 season. Returning healthier offensive line, some more stability at the quarterback position. If Burrow really is the real deal, like a lot of people expect him to be, then Mixon could be in store for a nice little run in 2020. Next at number 8, we have got Derrick Henry. And for Henry, it finally happened. In 2019, he had that career breakout season that we were all hoping we would see from him at some point in time. In fact, he is the league reigning rushing yard leader. But you still might be saying, well, why is he at the number 8 spot considering he finished as the number 2 standard scoring running back and number 5 in PPR formats in 2019? Well, let's not forget that Derrick Henry is a bit one-dimensional still, because more so than any running back on this list, he lacks in the pass catching category, because probably if you project him for 20 receptions for 200 yards in 2020, that's a decent projection, and anything more would be a bonus. So that's why we have to look at him as more of a standard type running back. And even there, you have to account for some regression, because the question that you have to answer is, do you believe in the Tennessee Titans, and was last year a fluke? Because they just paid Ryan Tannehill big money, but more often than not, we have seen Ryan Tannehill be inconsistent. The loss of an experienced offensive lineman with Jack Conklin as well could be an issue. And for that reason, we do expect to see some regression for Derrick Henry. The redeeming factor is that he will by far be the integral part of this offense, as we saw for the majority of the 2019 season, specifically in the playoffs. So volume should be there. But in general, we do expect some regression from the Tennessee Titans this season. That's why we are a little bit nervous from Derrick Henry, but he should still have that top 10 running back potential, especially in standard formats. In PPR, admittedly, it is a little bit riskier. Continuing on to number 9, we have got Kenyan Drake, and things really turned around for Drake last season once he was traded to the Arizona Cardinals. And even though he wasn't a top 15 running back last season because of continuity and stability issues and the change in teams, we absolutely believe he can be that and more in 2020. Because once Drake was traded to the Cardinals and David Johnson was hurt, he was given every opportunity to succeed, and boy, did he ever. And looking forward to 2020, with David Johnson no longer a part of the Arizona Cardinals, Kenyan Drake should get a lot of opportunities. And on top of that, something that makes him an appealing option in PPR formats is he's a pretty good pass catcher. 50 receptions on the year last season, and that was in 14 games played. So we do expect to see a little bit of an increase in that category. Probably going to get you close to 1,000 yards rushing, maybe a little bit less. But either way, this is a running back that we are buying the hype on. He is in an offense that's up and coming, that arguably is a top fantasy offense as far as 2020 stocks to buy. It's got a up and coming quarterback in Kyler Murray that many people believe will be the next young quarterback to break out. Upgraded offensive line, and obviously with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins, that will open things up for everybody. To some extent, Drake reminds us of a mini Alvin Kamara, so for that reason, we love the upside here, and maybe with even less competition of a Latavius Murray behind him. So for that reason, we're absolutely buying Drake as a top 10 fantasy running back in 2020. Coming in at number 10, we have got James Conner, and definitely the running back that we're the most bullish on this year compared to other analysts. He's probably ranked 18th, 19th, 20th overall on other lists, whereas as you can see, we have got him in the top 10. And yes, sure, he comes with injury concerns. In 2019, he only played 10 games, but we'd argue that 2019 is a throwaway for Conner and every other Pittsburgh offensive player, because as soon as Ben Roethlisberger got hurt in week 2, that was it for that Pittsburgh offense. That's all she wrote. And sure, James Conner is going to be a risky option because he's been injured these last 2 seasons, but we've said it before. In fantasy football, you have to project a full 16 games for these guys when looking at projections and tiers and rankings. And like we said about Dalvin Cook last season, go ahead and take a chance on this guy. He has the potential. We've seen it before even. He stays healthy. He plays the majority of the season. He's going to be a top 10 finisher. Because when Ben Roethlisberger is under center for the Pittsburgh Steelers, this is a great offense. They have a great offensive line as well, and James Conner is extremely versatile. A great pass catcher, someone that'll get you close to 1,000 yards rushing as well, and he is the unquestioned volume RB1 workhorse for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So for that reason, we love the upside here. Go ahead, invest a pick in James Conner while you still can, while he's being undervalued and before his ADP starts to skyrocket. At number 11, we have got Miles Sanders. And Sanders is a guy that enjoyed a pretty successful rookie year, as he was the number 15th overall scoring running back across standard and PPR formats over 800 rushing yards, and 50 receptions for over 500 receiving yards as well. We absolutely believe that Sanders can go ahead and improve on those numbers, especially in the rushing department when Jordan Howard no longer in town, as that pretty much leaves Sanders and Boston Scott. And the Eagles have pretty much said that they expect a big volume type of increase for Miles Sanders being the guy. And yes, those receiving yards might decrease because the Eagles have added more receiving weapons. But guess what? That'll probably go ahead and produce some more scoring opportunities, as the Eagles probably going to be one of the better equipped offenses in the NFL. So we should probably see a higher total touchdown number, where Sanders will likely see positive regression, as he only had 6 total combined touchdowns in 2019. Other than that, the only slight concern here is the injury of Brendan Brooks on that offensive line. A great offensive lineman that's lost for an entire season. That does hurt, but we still think volume will end up making Sanders a top 15 running back. If there are any more injuries to this offensive line, it is worth re-examining, because it could become a situation like the Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Mixon and what happened to that offensive line last season. But I would say the Eagles are a little bit better prepared to tackle a situation like that with better quarterback play and better weapons around. So for that reason, Miles Sanders projects to be a surefire top 15 running back in 2020. And finally, coming in at number 12, we have got Leonard Fournette. Definitely a running back that probably some people are staying away from in 2020. We still like the upside for Fournette. Yes, he is a tier 3 running back for us, along with Miles Sanders and James Conner, and he'll probably be a low to mid-end RB1. But when you look at the total numbers at the end of the year, we believe he will be in the top 12, top 15 category, because we said it last year. First and foremost, Fournette is an underrated pass catcher. And he definitely proved that, as he had over 75 receptions in 2019. Now, yes, we expect a dip there just because that was such a huge spike, but he should still be good for around 50 receptions. And even though he is having his fair share of issues with the Jacksonville Jaguars, he's still projecting to be the number 1 running back for that offense, and he should see plenty of volume, which will translate to probably around 1,000 yards rushing. And when you add all of that up and factor that there's probably no running back in the NFL that will see a higher positive regression in total touchdowns, as Fournette only had 3 total touchdowns in 2019, consider that those numbers will probably be doubled in 2020, and you have to like the upside. Yes, the Jacksonville Jaguars will be an inconsistent offense, and they'll go ahead and make you pull your hair out, but Fournette will be the most consistent, most viable fantasy option on that offense. He is still someone that you want to go ahead and take a chance on. Low to mid-end RB1 with a lot of opportunities. We still like Fournette in 2020. So with that, we conclude this look into our top 12 running backs for this 2020 fantasy football season. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree with this list? Are there names that you thought were ranked too high, too low? And who'd be on your respective lists, along with any other fantasy questions you guys might have? And as a reminder, go ahead, check out the all new and updated website at alldaypigskin.com. Get exclusive content there, along with getting yourself a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. All the details in the description. Great value for everything you could possibly want. And as always, if you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, and we'll see you in future videos.